Welcome to Essential Dynamics Podcast. I'm Derek Hudson. I'm the founder of the Essential Dynamics Podcast. Today, I'm excited to have my colleague Dave Kane with me. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing really well, Derek. Thanks for bringing me back here.
Well, it's good to have you back. The Essential Dynamics Podcast, we talk about the concepts that we've been developing in the Essential Dynamics framework, which helps us understand how systems work, particularly business systems, and help people and organizations improve their performance. Dave has got excellent questions, excellent ideas, and so we want to just have this as a conversation as we explore some topics that we've alluded to but haven't really got into yet. So, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Well, I think so far through this season, you spent sort of a lot of time talking about, those the business staples or the business things that we hang on to and we need to just stop doing. And the one that sort of occurred to me over the last few podcasts I've been listening to is that idea of low-hanging fruit, and that companies, you just need to get out there and start knocking off the low-hanging fruit, and that's going to create value for you. And that doesn't hold together for me. So I was kind of hoping to explore that one for a bit. So
low-hanging fruit, what do you think we mean when people say you just have to go looking for the low-hanging fruit?
I think it's just this idea out there that there's these quick solutions to these easily solved problems, and any problem you can solve is going to increase value, right? So the more of these problems you solve, the more value is going to be flowing through your system. And I think it's a bit of an illusion, but I don't know. I was going to try and explore with you within the sort of the essential dynamics way of looking at things.
Sure. Well, let me go back to my early consulting days when I was with a Big Four professional services firm. And from time to time, that phrase came up. And I think the idea was we're trying to convince the client to undertake some kind of change initiative, and they're nervous about it. And so we think, well, if we can do some easy stuff and show that the easy stuff has an impact, then, we can kind of get in and get started.
It builds momentum, builds credibility. Everybody wants to just sort of get the ball rolling, right?
Yeah. So, but I have huge problems with it too. And so we've talked about it in different contexts. We've had a number of conversations about being stuck. And one of the ways we say that you naturally can get stuck in an organization is you solve all the easy problems. And as you do that, your organization builds in size and complexity, and the problems get harder and harder until you bump up against one you don't know how to solve, and then you get stuck. So if you're in that mode, and instead of wanting to deal with the hard problem, you go around looking for easy problems, well, the first thing is it's not going to get you unstuck. So what actually are you doing? So there's something to that, which is it's not the right problem to solve. Mm-hmm. And another thing would be, well, hasn't everyone already harvested the low-hanging fruit? Like, that's kind of by definition the first stuff that's going to go. So what kind of an organization has not even done that?
Well, yeah. And to me, a lot of times the easy stuff is just a bit of that distraction, right? It diverts attention away from, there's probably some more important issue out there that you're better off putting the time and energy towards rather than two or three of the easy ones. Because like you say, if you've done them, you've gotten to a point where there's probably a more serious constraint out there that you need to start looking at. So it's just that bit of a distraction. It's a bit of a diversion of resources better placed elsewhere.
Well, and I'll put a link in here, but one of the other concepts that we talk about is the idea that management attention is limited. And you only have so much capacity at the top of an organization to decide what to focus on and put energy in things. So if you're putting energy in easy problems, that's that much more capacity that you don't have to deal with the tricky problems. Yeah. So I guess we'll probably include the concept that we've had in the title for some of our episodes, business traditions that have to stop now, finding low-hanging fruit. So we've kind of established that in this early days that we don't think that's great. Let's just beat it down a little bit more though. What are all the problems with chasing low hanging fruit? So we talked about distraction.
We're talking about distraction, and I think one of the other ones in my mind, and it's not always a bad thing, but there's this illusion of progress, right? There's this false sense that you're making progress, and in a lot of organizations, sometimes you need that because of outside reasons. Your stakeholders are demanding it, or it just you need to like build that momentum, like we're talking about. And a lot of times, it just gives everybody in the company this idea that we're doing stuff, and that's a good thing, and we're moving stuff along. But we're not increasing the value. But there's this illusion that, well, if everybody's busy and everybody's working on it, we're going to end up getting gains. And unfortunately, if you're not focused on the right thing, and you're focused on these easy things, you're going to get to the end of the year, look at all the stuff you achieved, but the cycle isn't any different. You're not generating any greater value. So it's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's you're just fooling yourself a little bit.
Well, there's some self-deception going on.
That's it, yeah.
About progress. So let's talk about that for a second. If you have clarity on what the purpose of the organization is, purpose is one of the essential elements of essential dynamics. If you're clear on the purpose and you're clear on the path, which is second essential element, like the steps that you need to take to accomplish the purpose, then it's easier to look at a proposed initiative and to say, how does that help us accomplish our purpose? And if you can't point to increased creation of value, then you might then not be as tempted to pursue these easy outs in the quest for looking like you're making progress. If you know what real progress is, the illusion of progress can't stand up.
Right. Yep. And I think that's just a great, easy first screen, right? Is measured against your purpose like that. And then the second one, if you want to dive a little deeper on it, is you start looking at, your flow and understanding what are the key constraints. And if this is actually going to make the difference to improving the flow, right? So you can kind of go through your granularity of examination to figure out, is this easy win the right win? So, because I think that kind of leads me to a different thought of, I always like going back to the flow of what's going through the pipe and what's being constrained and stuff. And my worry with some of the low hanging fruit is just that unintended consequences, right? So, take it to so many of my other, even just projects outside of business. I remember even a few years ago, I was helping some people put in a water line out of the lake, and you're just putting a pump into the water. And I probably spent about 20 minutes messing around with a little foot valve, which is at the end that keeps the pressure in the hose and the water. And it was the easy thing because it was right in front of me. And I thought, well, this is obviously the problem of why things aren't working. And it had nothing to do with the problem, but I thought it was an easy fix. I spent half an hour doing it and then ended up having to undo it later on. And I kind of see that with some of the low hanging fruit is there's unintended consequence of, if you're not fixing the right thing, you may end up having to come undo that, or you may have to come and change something because what you've done has made the constraint worse.
Well, I'd love for us, like on the spot here, very quickly to think of some examples of unintended consequences. And I've got one. I'm not sure it works really well, but when I was at Microline, we had a dynamic environment. We hired a bunch of people quickly. We had, we're still an organization that was sort of forming its culture and its processes and stuff like that. Very interested in having employees really involved. And at some point I was approached by a university student to ask if we would participate in an employee survey project that they would administer. So it was no cost to us. And this team of students would come in, they would craft the questions, send out the questions, get the responses, compile them, and report back. And it didn't cost us any money and very little time. And then we would get feedback from our employees. So we did that. I did have some worries about it, but we did it. And here's the thing about employee surveys. As soon as you ask the questions, you change the environment. And so now we have expectations for employees that weren't there before. Not just weren't stated, weren't there. And now these new expectations from employees have been created. And now people want this, that, or whatever for their work-life balance or for their engagement at work or training, for future career opportunities, all this stuff. They were fine before, and after the survey, now they want to know what we're going to do about this stuff. And so then we had to have a meeting with everyone and talk about our real priorities for the organization and where this stuff would fit in them. And that was a lot of time that we didn't need to spend because they were actually fine before. And they were fine after we worked our way through it. But in the moment, the survey created a change in the environment. And the only change that we saw was not positive, at least initially.
As you said, I can think of a few.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep going off on the pulse check surveys and stuff. And the other example I can think of was working with a retail organization, and the main part of the flow was the more people you got in the door to sort of sample the product, the higher chance of sales. Because once they tasted it, they loved it and they bought it because it was they were making things. And the low hanging fruit for everybody within the organization was the system or the software system and the way you track sales and process them. And I think we spent about a year, trying to figure out the exact system to bring in there, and spent tons of time and money. And we changed how we interacted with the customer to put in the system, but we didn't increase the number of people coming in the door, tasting it and choosing to buy. And so, but by focusing on this one piece, what we did though is we did change how the customer interaction went for the people we did get in the door. And for a little while there, we actually saw a bit of a reduction in how many people who came through the door consumed. And so, because everybody jumps to the system as being, well, not necessarily the easy solution, because it was a nightmare, but it was low hanging and obvious to everybody. It started affecting the important parts in getting the commitment to sale without sort of realizing we've just done a bit of damage to the thing we should have been fixing in the first place.
So that's really interesting. Maybe we can broaden our understanding of what low hanging fruit might mean. It could be in maybe a couple of categories. One would be it's something that could be easily fixed.
Yep.
And another thing might be it's something that's an obvious target, not necessarily easily fixed.
Right. It's just it's the go-to because there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of people suggesting that's the one you should go fix, and it's easier to find information. It's easier to come up with the solution or the person to come tweak it for you.
Right. So we need a database. I don't know how many times I've heard that in my career.
Yeah.
Like we need a database. And so you'll find someone who will take your substandard data and put it in a form that you can manipulate it. But as you say, maybe make the customer experience worse, certainly not make it better, and certainly not change the fundamentals of the process. And so the low-hanging fruit in that point was we didn't have to spend a lot of time because we know better data, like we have bad data. So let's get better data. Not necessarily easy to do. You spend a lot of money.
Yep.
Ultimately, no positive impact. I really wonder right now if that thing in our world is adopting artificial intelligence in your organization. It's not easy. But you could say, well, it's 2024. We need an AI strategy in our organization. And I don't know if that's not distraction and illusion of progress in most cases.
Yeah, that one. And I think the one we've used in the past is, going digital and taking a digital grant and stuff to go pursue building out your web presence, which may or may not help you. And I think sort of that low-hanging fruit idea is either it's the very easy one to do, so you can tick a bunch of things off the list, or it's just a very easy one to land on. It's the obvious. It's the one everybody else is doing. It's, you're not going to spend the time to examine your hypothesis to figure out, is it the right thing to fix? It's just, what's an easy answer to get to? Let's just go with that one.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. You said you're not going to take time to examine your hypothesis. Why wouldn't organizations want to get it right? Why do they want to jump to solutions?
Well, I think, there's always this, well, not always, but there's often this pressure to be doing something, to be moving towards it. But a lot of organizations don't have that understanding of their system. They don't have that sort of that value creation system mapped out. So any improvement is a good improvement. And so it moves there a bit faster. And it's not to say that isn't all, there aren't instances where doing something is better than doing nothing. If you're in early days, where there are a lot of easy problems before you get to them, or a new venture, or there's political pressures on why you need to do it. But, in other organizations, as you get to the more challenging ones and you see your value creation system, it's a hypothesis, and you do need to do tests every so often. You do need to just try to fix something to see how the other pieces interact. But at least then you're doing that interaction, knowing you're testing the hypothesis, and you're looking for how it affected everything else. You're not just, we need to go fix that, and then I'm going to go on to the next thing.
So I know you want to talk about this. So let's go back to when this low-hanging fruit idea might help. And I just have a story. I told you that I'd relate it. I'll disguise the client a little bit, but I worked with an organization this was like 25 years ago, seemed like it was frozen in time 25 years before that. And it was a bit of a family business, couple of families involved, I think. So the senior people were probably in their 70s. Nothing had changed for a long time. They did need better computer systems, but they also needed to understand their business and line up the way they worked with what actually was happening in the business. As we interviewed people, we just heard about how bad it was, about bad morale, bad process, bad customer service, bad leadership, all this stuff. It was quite depressing. And in one conversation, someone asked me, how can you do this all day? Just sit here and listen to people complain. And I joked and I said, well, I go for a run after work and then I have a shower and then I'm fine. But of course, the reason that I could do it is because all the time my mind's scheming on how do we break this logjam? How do we move forward? And so I asked people what changes they wanted to see, and they had some, really good, structural changes, but some other things that kept coming up. And so I put all this together in a presentation. I got to sit down with the CEO just one-on-one and just let him have it. And he had basically no idea what was going on, like what the people were thinking and stuff. And I just let him have it. And I could see that he really wanted to do something about it, and he didn't really know what to do. And he said, well, like, how can I start? And I said, well, why don't you try Casual Fridays? And that's something that had come up over and over again in the interviews was, we want Casual Fridays. They were dressed formally, but no one ever had outside contact with anyone. So, these days we wouldn't understand why they were dressed up, but that was the culture. If we could just have Casual Fridays, that would be a sign of change, because we've been asking for it for years and it hasn't happened. We talked about some other things that he could do. And so the next time I visited that client, and they were not in Edmonton here, so I wasn't there all the time. They had a parking lot tailgate party where the CEO was not in a suit for the first time that anyone had ever seen. Jeans and a golf shirt, flipping burgers. People came up to me and they said, "I can't believe it. What did you like? How did you do this? It changed." And then that allowed them to form some teams to look at some of the other stuff, integrating their systems and changing their value creation process. So there's some times when, that that early win is important. I don't know that anyone there thought that it was low hanging fruit in the sense that they hadn't ever had any momentum on anything ever. So they just needed something to signal the change. So I think that's an interesting example of we got to get this thing moving somehow, and then once it's moving, then let's direct it to where it needs to go.
That's really interesting, because as you're sort of saying that, I'm thinking, so quite often when we think of low hanging fruit and we're talking about it, it's when we talk essential dynamics, you have purpose, path, and people. And a lot of times within the path side, you're looking at drivers and constraints. And so the low hanging fruit is usually in people's first place to jump to within the drivers and constraint conversation. As you're talking about that, though, what you are addressing is very much on the people side. And what do the individual need from the organization? What does the organization need from the people? And so what they did was the low hanging fruit, but it was over on the people side of things. And so I could argue that it probably was one of the more important ones to do. They didn't realize it at the time. You probably didn't realize it at the time, but it all fits. It's just understanding that low-hanging fruit isn't always a drivers and constraints issue. You can take it up, as you would call, to the meta level, where you're starting to talk purpose, path, and people, and which of those pillars and how they interact is the more important one to focus on first.
Yeah, I appreciate that analysis from something that happened a long time ago, Dave, because what needed to happen is the people needed to have some confidence that if they stretched out a little bit, that things would get better. Mm-hmm. And that's all that we did. And it could have been anything that happened to be in the late 90s. Casual Friday was a thing, and they didn't have it, and they got it, and they said, "Well, if that can happen, then anything can happen." So it was really kind of fun to see that. There's one other thing I wanted to go back to. We talk about, and that is this idea that if you're pursuing low hanging fruit, maybe it's because you're either risk averse or, dare I say, complacent or lazy. And I guess you could look at your motivation and say, is your motivation to create an illusion of progress? In which case, that's a sign that we're not doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. If your motivation is to crack things open, and then take the next thing on and get substantive in your change, if that's your motivation, then I think you could do the same change, and it would be seen differently. It would feel different, and you would move forward. But if you're just trying to make it look like you're doing stuff, terrible waste of time and effort.
Well, I think that idea of, I don't know if lazy mindset's quite the right word for it. Maybe it's comfortably stuck, maybe something like that. But I think that's a whole deeper, totally different conversation we could have. And maybe we should park that and then try it for next time, because, man, there's a lot there on that one.
Okay, so let's close off on this conversation then. And the risks of chasing the easy solutions are they might not have any impact. At best, they might be a distraction. At worst, they might introduce things into the system that have unintended consequences. If you're doing something to look like you're making progress, fundamentally, that's wrong. And so let's not start our change journey by saying, what's the easiest thing we could fix? Let's start by saying what really needs to be connected so that we can add value in this process. We can accomplish the purpose of the organization.
Right. And so before we dive off into doing the easy thing, the quick assessment of making sure it's the right thing by sort of screening it, does it align with your purpose? Is it purpose X, purpose Y is the easy first one. And then the second one is looking at it within, I'm testing my hypothesis. Let's go see if we can improve the purpose, path, and people. And if we go with this one, let's test it and see what the reactions are from it and how to keep improving the value.
Yeah. Is this going to remove a significant limitation to us creating value?
Yeah.
And is this going to remove a significant block to engaging our people?
Yeah, because a lot of times, as in so many things in life, it's sometimes you just got to go take on the hard things. Let's just bite the bullet and take on the big ones.
That's right. And the whole idea, if we did pull us all the way back to Central Dynamics, we started with the idea of being on an epic quest. And of course, that gives hard things meaning because we're accomplishing a great purpose. So let's get solid on the purpose, and then, we can do hard things. So I think that's our time, and great conversation. Dave, thanks very much. Dave and I can be found at Unconstrained. We're being helped in the back room by Bryn Griffiths. Bryn, thanks for your help. And until next time, everyone, consider your quest.